You are good to go, Ken.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. All right, everyone, welcome to the War Industry Resistors Network. And we do these webinars, as many of you know. I'm sure you've been with us before, many of you. We do them every month. And I just realized that we've been doing this for almost 4 years now, because this is number 45, this webinar. So got a pretty good run here going. We've covered a lot of different aspects of the military-industrial complex. And if you are interested, every one of our webinars is recorded and it's on our website. And I'll post the link to our website, and you can go look at a recording if you like. This evening, we have Jasper Nathaniel with us. He's a journalist who has been in Palestine quite a lot, in the West Bank especially. And that's our topic tonight, is the West Bank. We've done maybe 4 or 5 other webinars on Palestine, and it's so urgent that you can't just talk about it enough. So let me give you a little brief little bio about Jasper, and then we'll get started. Before I do, though, let me just give a shout out. Many of you may be following the global Samud flotilla. And if you are, you know that there have been flotillas before trying to break the siege and take humanitarian aid into Gaza. And this time, there are about 50 boats going together in a flotilla from 44 different countries. And they're at sea now. They've already left Barcelona. They're going to stop in Tunisia. I think they're going to stop in Italy, pick up more boats. And I just heard today that the Israeli Navy is doing military exercises in preparation. So, it's not, who knows? They may get in, they most likely will not get in, but the eyes of the world all over the place are watching this now. So here's a shout out and a prayer for the people in that flotilla. So that's about Gaza and how the tragedies every day unfolding there. This evening, though, we're going to talk about something not so visible, but tragic nonetheless. For many, many years, many of you, I'm sure, know about the occupation in the West Bank, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So Jasper Nathaniel is a Brooklyn-based writer, and he's a reporter who's been to Palestine a number of times. I'm going to, first of all, ask him to tell us about that, how often he's been there and all that. He covers Israel's occupation of the West Bank and other political and cultural affairs. He has a website, or Substack, I should say, and I'm going to post that link in there in the chat, too. It's Infinite Jazz. Name is Jasper, so it's Jaz, 1Z, Infinite Jazz, one word, .substack.com. So you can follow him there, as I do, and well worth it. He posts a lot of good reporting there. So let me just say that there's a long history. You may know I've been to Palestine, to the West Bank, a couple of times over the years, most recently this year in February. And there's a long history of land stealing and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. And you can track it back to not just to the Nakba in 1948, but before Israel became a state, back over 100 years. There's plenty of documentation about that. We're not going to go through all that history this evening. We're just going to focus on the current situation. So at this time, there are about 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and some 700,000 settlers. And I think they're going to try to get more settlements all the time. I think the target is 1 million settlers. Hamas, this is not about Hamas in the West Bank, right? They don't have authority in the West Bank. And so what is going on can't be rationalized. All of the occupations and the attacks going on in the West Bank can't be rationalized by what happened on October 7th. Although the Israeli violence has accelerated a great deal since then. So that's just my way of introduction. So let's jump in here with Jasper, and let me get you, Jasper, just to start off by talking about your relationship with Palestine, how often you've been there, and your connection to it.
Yeah, thank you, Ken, and thank you everybody for joining this evening. Well, I originally came to Palestine just as a Jewish person who I didn't grow up in a like, overtly Zionist household, but my mom's family was pretty much wiped out in the Holocaust, and my dad's family was they were some of the last Jews in Baghdad in Iraq before the Nazi anti-Semitism made its way there, and they were forced out as well. So Israel just sort of had this idea. We had this idea in my household that it was like the place for Jews to be safe if they needed to. They needed a place for safety, but I didn't do birthright. I didn't feel any real emotional connection to it. And then it was probably in college in 2006-ish when I started just learning more about the real history of the Nakba and the occupation and all that. Um, and so then I became engaged as an activist, as Jewish Voice for Peace, that sort of thing. And then I didn't really start covering it as a journalist until after October 7th, because basically what happened was, maybe we can get into this in a bit, but even before October 7th, earlier in 2023, there were some really sort of fundamental shifts that were going on in Israel and with regards to the Israeli government that was enabling the situation in the West Bank to get much more violent and the settlement building to accelerate. And then when October 7th happened, they Smotrich, who I'm sure a lot of people here know, the finance minister, who's a settler himself, and all these other sort of settler leaders immediately began conflating the Palestinian Authority, who governs the West Bank, with Hamas, who obviously governs Gaza. And, it was a very sort of intentional collapse of the distinction to frame the Palestinians in the West Bank as the enemies of Israel in the same way that they were, framing all the Palestinians in Gaza as the enemies of Israel. And so with that sort of rhetorical merger of the PA and Hamas, everything that Israel was already doing to increasingly dispossess the Palestinians in the West Bank and to, increasingly support settler violence, it just started like spinning out of control and going haywire. And after October 7th, I sort of realized nobody's going to be paying attention to this because, for starters, we're going to be talking about October 7th for, months and months and months, forever, frankly. And it was, I think, clear to most people here, there's going to be a genocide in Gaza that was going to be sucking up a lot of attention too. And so what was going to happen in the West Bank was just going to go mostly unremarked on. And so I just sort of made a conscious decision, like, I'm going to cover the West Bank. Like I'm going to pay very close attention to what's happening there. And so I went there in January 2024. So just like a couple months after October 7th. And I spent about a month there. And then I went back a couple times throughout the year. And I just worked on a number of stories that I can talk about. And I was able to visit settlements once. I think that ship has sailed for me. I don't know that I'll be allowed back into the settlements. But I was able to, I had what I think is like the same sort of radicalizing experience that a lot of people have when they visit the West Bank, or the one that like Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about last year that I'm sure a lot of people here read, where you just can't believe what you're seeing. There's no amount of reading you could have done beforehand that would have prepared you for just the sheer cruelty and brutality of the occupation and how it's just so pervasive and it's just everywhere you look. And so that was, I was already pretty sort of firm in my political commitments to free Palestine, but after seeing it and just meeting so many families whose children and brothers and sisters had been murdered by settlers or by soldiers, and meeting people and then they would be murdered after the fact, and having my own close encounters with just these barbaric settlers and soldiers, it just really sort of cemented for me that this is what I need to focus on. And maybe just the last thing I'll say on this question, Ken, is that in biblical terms, the West Bank is much more significant than Gaza to Jewish people. Gaza is, in the Old Testament, it's the land of the Philistines, who are the sort of the eternal foe of the Israelites, and it's a place to be conquered and raised, but not really inhabited per se. Whereas the West Bank, which settlers know as Judea and Samaria, which refers to the different kingdoms of ancient Israel, that's like the cradle of Jewish civilization. And so to the settlers who have this sort of messianic view of the world, it's taking that land is it's prophecy to them. And I should say, like, it's impossible to know where the sort of messianism stops and it just becomes racism or territorial ambition or any number of other things like real estate grabs, frankly. But it's all mixed up in this really just brutal concoction that has caused the siege on the West Bank to be a much more sort of methodical, systematic one than Gaza, which is, as people are seeing, just sheer annihilation. They don't want to annihilate the West Bank in that way. It's filled with Jewish treasures and settlements and whatnot. And so instead, they have these much more, I think, nefarious ways of basically, dispossessing the Palestinians there.
Yeah. Tell us more about what the occupation looks like, Jasper. I mean, I can vouch for what you say about being shocked at the brutality of it. My partner Melanie and I went there 10 years ago on our own, traveled on public transportation, stayed with Palestinians, and you're exactly right. No matter how much you read about it and understand it intellectually, it hits you in the gut when you see people so badly mistreated, even at checkpoints or in the streets or in their homes or wherever it may be. It's the kind of daily humiliation that they endure. So can you give us a sort of, I don't know, a general big picture of what it looks like for people who haven't been there, the occupation?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a couple levels that it takes place on. The first one, which you alluded to, Ken, is just this sort of daily humiliation and indignities. I mean, these soldiers in the West Bank, forgetting the settlers for a minute, the soldiers are really just bullies. I mean, they are so mean. And like, just to give you a sort of representative anecdote, when I was in Hebron, I went to and I was actually with Hisham, Ken, who you know. We went into a cafe and we were just drinking coffee and having cookies. And the Hebron, the old city, had basically been shut down, and so there was no business there. So this baker just had like this plates full of cookies and baklava, and he was just like, "Please eat all of them." He wouldn't take any of my money. So we were just sort of taking a breather in there. And as we're in there, two soldiers just walk in and just knock the tray of cookies onto the floor. Just swipe it off the counter, knock it onto the floor. And then he says to the owner of the bakery, who was on crutches because he had broken his leg, he said in Arabic, because it was translated for me, he said, "Next time I'll break your other fucking leg." And like, there was just absolutely, I mean, when I say there was no provocation, I mean, we were sitting quietly in this coffee shop and they just walked in and did that. And this is the kind of thing that's just happening constantly. And it's, if you were in a coffee shop in America and a cop walked in and did that, it would shock your conscience. I mean, you would not believe what you just saw. And frankly, you would probably be telling that story for the rest of your life. This is the kind of thing that happens every single day, just everywhere you look. And so that's the kind of thing that's just always happening. I mean, then there's I think people know all about the checkpoints and the roadblocks and like just the ways that it manifests itself. Um, a friend of mine who lives in Sebastia, which is in the north, right by Nablus, his father is he's a doctor and he has diabetes, and because of his diabetes he has some condition where it's putting pressure on his eyes, and he's been getting treated for this condition for years and years and years, but by a specialist in Ramallah, which is in the central West Bank. uh, After they put in these new checkpoints, they just decided he can't go to Ramallah anymore. This is a doctor. He has he has no history of armed resistance, or he's not even an activist. He's just a doctor, and he has pled with them, and he has doctor's notes. And what's happening now is he's going blind, and he's losing his vision. And the doctor that can treat him is, just past a checkpoint over there, but they just won't let him go. And so he's going blind because of that. And, this is happening everywhere. Um, maybe the last thing I'll mention just about what, or maybe two more things is, I think people are pretty familiar with the just brutal settler violence that's happening every single day in the West Bank. These guys, it depends where in the West Bank you are. It takes different forms. In some places, they, will just shoot at you from their settlement. In Hebron, they are literally, the settlements are like above the city looking down and like quite literally in like a corridor, and they'll like dump buckets of feces on people who walk by. And then there's, these places like the shepherding villages in the Hebron Hills and these Bedouin communities where the settlers are just going in and, setting their homes on fire and killing people in some cases. So that's obviously going on. And then maybe the last thing I'll just mention is it's what I call municipal sabotage. So this town, Sebastia, that I spent a lot of time in, the occupation has systematically dismantled their entire sort of municipal apparatus. And what I mean by that is they don't let the garbage trucks leave town except for like some very narrow, they put just some ridiculous arbitrary rules on when the garbage trucks can leave. And so because of that, there's garbage piling up in the town. They confiscated the town's bulldozer, which they use to, clear debris, and do construction and things like that. And so there was this huge rainstorm coming, and they had to use the bulldozer to clear debris from the water canals so that it wouldn't flood because there's water nearby. They took the bulldozer and arrested the bulldozer driver as they were doing this. Because of that, there was a huge flood. It destroyed property. It shut down the town for like 3 days. And so that they really like all these sort of basic civic just things that are happening in every town in the world, every functioning town in the world that we don't even think about because they just happen when we're sleeping or behind the scenes. They just are not allowing them to do them anymore. And so the towns themselves are, basically like they're not able to function, and they're shutting down, and they're getting covered in trash, and their water sources are getting cut off. So it's just, when I say it's pervasive, it's that's what I mean. I mean, literally see it walking down the street. You see it everywhere you look, basically.
Yeah, since you mentioned bulldozers, did you meet Jeff Halper when you were there?
No, I did. I mean, I know of him, but I did not get a chance
Yeah,
to meet
so
him.
Jeff's someone we've gotten to know, and he's, for those of you who don't know Jeff, we've actually done a webinar with Jeff. He was the founder of Israel Committee Against Home Demolitions. And if you don't know about the way they demolish homes and often make the Palestinian homeowners pay for the demolition or do it themselves, and you do see this going on all the time. It's exactly, I mean, Jasper, you're mentioning the infrastructure that they're tearing down, but they actually knock down the homes themselves.
Yeah.
Did you see some of that or talk to anybody who lost their homes while you were there?
Oh yeah. I mean, everywhere. In the Jordan Valley, I met a family whose home had been destroyed 3 separate times. In Sebastia, I mean, the particular sort of flavor of the occupation there is that this is one of the most it's an archaeological site, basically, this town, Sebastia. And so Israel has basically weaponized antiquities law to claim that, oh, this house over here is built on top of Jewish heritage, so we have to tear it down. And you're not allowed to build over here because, that's a so-and-so's tomb. And so they're constantly, this is what I mean when I say it's more like sinister. They have all these little mechanisms designating state land, designating heritage sites. They have all these little mechanisms of doing that. And then I spent some time in Masfer Yatta, which I'm sure people are familiar with if they've seen No Other Land, where, I mean, they in that case, it's the explanation is that it's been declared a military training zone. And so because it's a military training zone, Israel now has the right to tear down any structure they want. And in fact, they're going in and tearing down structures every single day. So yeah, it'd be hard to go to the West Bank and not meet people who, had their home torn down.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Masa Priyata. We got to visit there too, and you've written about it. Why don't you elaborate a little bit on what's coming down in Masa Priyata?
Yeah, so Masriata is it's in the South Hebron Hills, which so it's basically like think of sort of rocky mountains, very windy, sort of more rugged terrain. The communities there, they're mostly Bedouin communities. They're built like directly into the rock. So they have like caves and everything is just, built into the side of the mountain. They've been there for a very long time. I mean, some of them are refugees from 1948, but others have been there for much longer. Um, and in the 80s, Israel just unilaterally declared this is a military training zone. And basically what happened was the people of Masriyata got some good lawyers, actually, some good Israeli lawyers, human rights attorneys, who got that basically jammed up in court for decades. And to be clear, like the military was still coming in and demolishing things, but they always had to have like a very specific reason for it. Meanwhile, these settlements were being built just above them on top of the hill and encroaching on them. But just a couple of years ago, I'm forgetting exactly when. Actually, it might have been last year. The case finally made its way through court, and the judge just greenlit turning it into a military training zone. So they exhausted their legal options, and so now the Israeli military comes in with just full demolition orders. Because it's worth noting, like they usually do come with some sort of an order or a warrant or justification, because they've weaponized the entire system. So now they're able to come in with just these blanket demolition orders, and it's nothing short of a disaster. People are sleeping in caves now, and then they come in and destroy the caves, and then they're sleeping on the ground, and there's not, these are not city people, so there's not really too many other options for them. And the other thing is that the settlers there are growing increasingly bold and violent. So one of the stories I did was about a guy named Zechariah Al-Adra. He is you see it at the very end of No Other Land. On October 13th, 2023, a group of settlers came down the hill, and one of them just shot him in the stomach. And it's on video. They know who did it. I know who did it. It's a guy named Yitzhak Nir. He's a father of five. He's got his father was a terrorist as well. And he was never arrested. He never was in court. He claimed it was self-defense. The video clearly shows that there's no threat against him. But this is what happens. They're able to just kill with impunity. And, this guy, in almost all certainty, had an American gun that was gifted to him by the state. And so, I think people probably heard of this other really high profile shooting that happened a couple months ago or a couple weeks ago of Auda Hatalin in Al Khair, which is right at the foot of Masriyata as well. The guy who came in and shot him dead is a known violent settler. Long before he murdered Auda Hatalin, this guy was infamous. His name's Yinon Levy. He was actually one of the 9 settlers that the Biden administration actually sanctioned. In my opinion, one of the few good things Biden did for the Palestinian people. Trump came in and immediately just lifted those sanctions. Anyway, the point is, this guy was a known, scary, violent person. I was actually warned about him when I was there. They said to me, if when you see the settlers come down from the hilltops, they're dangerous. Like the hilltop settlers are particularly dangerous. If you see this guy and they show me his picture, just go the other way, because this guy he's a psychopath basically. And yet, a couple months ago, he was given a gun and an ATV by Smotrich himself, the finance minister, in a big ceremony where they called him a hero and a pioneer. And he runs a construction company that is building out this illegal outpost. It's encroaching on Masriyata, and basically one day he just drove his bulldozer right through the land, came into the town, shot this guy, and left. He, again, is never going to see a day in jail, obviously. In fact, he was smiling in court and, basically got a pat on the back for what he did.
So that's sort of, I mean, I was going to ask you the question, I think you just kind of answered it, is that the settlers, who are more feared in some cases by Palestinians than the IDF itself, and they don't call it the IDF, they call it the IOF, Israeli Occupation Force. The settlers can be crazy violent, and not that the IOF can't be, but I ran into people who are very afraid of the settlers, and they're working hand in glove with the army. They come in, they do the nasty, dirty work, whatever it is, and then they're defended. Here comes the army defending them, and who gets arrested are not the crazy, violent settlers, it's the Palestinians, because whatever the rationale may be, it's, they threw rocks or they attacked us first. I mean, they basically lie about it. Is that your understanding? Is that the settlers are working hand in glove with the army?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, this is without getting into too much technical detail, there was a sort of fundamental event that fused that connection even tighter. So basically, the West Bank is a military occupation, of course. Now that has legal implications. A military occupation has to, nominally adhere to international law around military occupation, which goes back to the Hague Convention and the Geneva Convention and various other laws. And those laws basically amount to saying the occupying force is there to uh, maintain the security of the occupier and maintain the well-being of the occupied people. So they are legally responsible for maintaining the well-being of the Palestinian people. And the other part of it is that it is fundamentally a temporary occupation. So what that means is it is illegal to do anything that involves putting roots down, which is why the entire settlement enterprise is fundamentally illegal, because they are building uh, Israeli homes and villages on land that does not belong to them and violating international law. So for decades, the Israeli military, don't get me wrong, it is, incredibly brutal and they were basically enforcing a brutal apartheid system, but in a funny way, the military occupation provided some insulation between the Palestinian people and the most extremist the most extreme ambitions of the settlers. And what I mean by that is the settlers have a very specific ideology and mission, which is about, ethnically cleansing the entire West Bank, whereas the military as an institution is more about keeping order in, the most brutal way imaginable. And so there were lots of times in the last 50 years or so, since 67, where the settlers, or 60 years or so, where the settlers and the military were actually at odds with each other. And the military would chase the settlers around who were building these illegal outposts, and they would sometimes dismantle them. And the settlers were known for calling them, they would call soldiers Nazis. And then, and again, like this should not come off as me defending the Israeli military, but they just didn't have those same sort of ideological commitments necessarily. So what changed recently is that Smotrich, who was one of those kids running around the hills erecting outposts, a settler himself, when he entered the cabinet in early 2023, I think a lot of people probably know Netanyahu was forced to sort of build this coalition with these, extremist parties in order to have a majority coalition so he could stay in power. Smotrich suddenly has this huge amount of power and veto power, which he had never had before. And he works out a deal with the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, which basically Smotrich inserted himself inside the defense ministry. And then he built a sort of shadow government within the defense ministry that would siphon all the decision making away from the military lawyers and to these settler ideologues that Smotrich had appointed. So the idea being, if 4 years ago, the settlers wanted to build a new settlement, they would have to go to the military and they would have to seek approval, and it would have to go through this sort of basically like, bureaucratic process, which bottlenecked it and in some cases stopped it. Now it goes right around those lawyers and straight to somebody that Smotrich appointed himself, who just, rubber stamps everything put in front of him. And so all the guardrails that had, been under the military occupation are basically gone. The settlers are now able to, do everything they want without those sort of nominal things getting in the way. That was a huge fundamental change. And then, like I said before, after October 7th, they now have the added benefit of being able to just point to, security for everything they're doing. And so when you hear about the situation in the West Bank devolving, the accelerated settlement building, it actually is not just because of October 7th. It's because Smotrich was essentially appointed the governor of the West Bank and able to get rid of all these checks and balances to just let the building go wild there.
Oh, yeah, that's really helpful. Somebody, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, and we'll get to questions shortly. There's a question there that I was thinking that you hadn't mentioned yet, Jasper, which I'll just say that the settlers not only do hateful things to human beings, but they also kill livestock, they destroy crops, and the olive trees, they'll wipe out olive trees, the people hold sacred, it's their livelihood, and, they poison the water, they drop concrete down the wells. I mean, it's all in the sort of brutality of chasing people out, just trying, it's ethnic cleansing in such a brutal way that it entails killing the earth and the animals as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just can't even believe I get frustrated because I struggle to like explain, to put into words all the different ways that they are making the Palestinians' lives hell, which includes all the things you said and so much more. It's honestly, in a way, it's like trying to keep track of all the war crimes in Gaza. It's like by the time we find proof that, oh, they just, gunned down these 10 EMT workers, it's on video. There's already been, two more hospitals have been bombed, and, we can't even like stick with one atrocity. It's the same thing in the West Bank. It's like by the time I'm able to process, like, oh, they actually poisoned this entire flock, and that destroyed this shepherding community. I mean, that's all they had, and now it's destroyed them. That doesn't even make the news. I mean, it's not even a footnote anywhere. So it's so constant. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit, recent events are the IOF attacks on refugee camps, in Jenin and Tulkarm, and I'm not sure where all, Nablus, Ramallah, you know better than I. And they're actually, it's a siege that's not unlike what's come down in Gaza, right? There's like tanks and air attacks, drones, and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about what's going down in the refugee camps and why it's going down the way it's going down?
Yeah. So I mean, in Gaza, Hamas obviously runs the government, and Hamas has a military wing, the Al-Qassam brigades. In the West Bank, there's no state military for the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority, in fact, is known as a lot of people call it a subcontractor to Israel. They're, basically a collaborationist party. And so what that means is that the armed groups in the West Bank have basically been forced underground since the Second Intifada, and even before that, really. And they are just sort of scattered throughout the refugee camps, mostly the big ones being the Jenin refugee camp and the Tulkarm refugee camp. And so that's where these pockets of militancy are. And so that is the justification, as you said, Ken, for treating these places like Gaza, just leveling entire neighborhoods, displacing the people there over and over and over, cutting off water to them. I think the latest numbers are there's like 50,000 people still displaced from those places. We should talk about what you sent me earlier today, Ken, which I'd also seen the latest potential plan for annexation, because what it does, just to give a quick sort of gloss, is this potential plan that Smotrich is pitching for annexing the West Bank. What it does is it declares all of the West Bank to be Israeli territory, except for the 6 major cities, which includes Jenin and Tulkarm and Nablus and Ramallah and Jericho and Hebron. And the reason for that is because Israel wants the land, but they don't want the people, because if you make it into Israel, those people are citizens. And the Israel, of course, does not want another 2.5 million Palestinian citizens. And so what they're doing is they're saying, okay, these six, population centers in the West Bank will remain Palestine, but at the same time, we're going to treat them like Palestine, which is like bomb the hell out of them and displace them. And so I think that, what they're doing there is ramping up the ethnic cleansing, of course, and ultimately I think they plan on annexing those places too, but not until they get the people out, because again, they don't want those people to become citizens.
Yeah. You can see, by the way, if you tune into Al Jazeera or other places, you can see videos of, what we're talking about in the refugee camps. I mean, you can not take your eyes off of Gaza, but you can also see some of this stuff going on the West Bank. So Jasper, I want to, there's a couple of topics I want you to talk about before we go to Q&A. And one of them is about the prisons. And, we stand out here in Asheville, North Carolina, often, on behalf of Palestine. And it just about never fails that somebody has to say, release the hostages, right? As if that's what the genocide is about, really, in Gaza. But it begs the question of was it over 10,000 prisoners, Palestinians in prison, who are, I mean, I don't like the word hostage, they're captives. They're, sort of Israel's holding them and torturing them. Can you speak a little bit about about the prisons and the justice system and the administrative detentions and the martial law and all of that stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. So the West Bank has two different criminal justice systems. You might call it an apartheid system. It's got, the civil Israeli law, which is what applies to the settlers, and it's got military law, which is what applies to the Palestinians. The military law, what it basically means is that people can be arrested as just security threats. There doesn't actually need to be a charge against them. So they can just pick somebody up, bring them in front of a judge, show the judge secret evidence. They actually call it secret evidence that does not have to be revealed even to the defendant. And the judge can just say, yes, this person is a security threat, stick them in prison. That's called administrative detention. And in Gaza, they have a similar rule, which is called the unlawful combatants law, I believe. But basically what it amounts to is no due process. And so, look, do I think that some of the, 11,000 prisoners in Israeli military detention have, done something violent? Sure. And I think a lot of those people have been charged with crimes because Israel is not hesitant to, throw the books at these people. But there's thousands and thousands of them, including hundreds of children, including women and the elderly, who have not been charged. And one can only speculate that it's because they have nothing on them. And so these people are held in what Israeli human rights groups have called a network of torture camps. This prison system is overseen by Ben-Gvir, who is, a true out and out sadist. He has boasted about how he says prisoners go in fat and they come out skinny because he's starving them. They used to have 4 people to a cell. They now put 12 people in 4-person cells. They've taken their beds away. There's a scabies outbreak in these prisons. I've seen reported. I haven't seen it corroborated yet, but apparently they're moving prisoners from one prison to the other to spread these diseases around. I think 70 something Palestinian prisoners have died in Israeli military detention since October 7th. They detain the bodies, so oftentimes autopsies can't be done. And, again, they have no charges to fight. One of the cases is one that I'm very involved with, is a 16-year-old Palestinian American kid named Mohammed Zahir Ibrahim. He's from Florida. He's first cousins with Saifullah Musalet, who was beaten to death by settlers in the West Bank in July. And he is, they say he threw a rock. They didn't say he threw a rock at a person or at a car. They just say he threw a rock. They haven't thrown a charge against him. He's been in prison since February, 16 years old. He's not been allowed to speak with his family once. The embassy visited him once and said that he had lost a quarter of his body weight. He was covered in scabies. Um, and a 17-year-old from his prison was beaten to death about a month ago. Another 20-year-old, I think, died of disease there about a month before that. And this kid, he could, this is an American kid, and he could die in an Israeli prison. And what is just so maddening about it is there's no charge for him to fight. And so, what I say about this hostage thing is like, listen, um, I, saw those videos of the emaciated Israeli hostages in Gaza last month. I think one of them was technically a POW, but like, I thought it was horrifying. And, just like I find it horrifying, all the people in Gaza who are starving, and I hope those people make it home. But I just have no patience anymore for people who, just talk breathlessly about these captives in Gaza and don't even pay lip service to the thousands and thousands and thousands of people rotting away, being tortured, being starved in these Israeli prisons, who have been disappeared basically. Nobody, the Israel does not allow the Red Cross to visit them, which is also in violation of international law. So these people have just been disappeared. It's like a Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib type situation. And, to me, it's like, it's one of all the media failures since October 7th, the just complete disinterest from the media in covering the Israeli detention system is like one of its greatest failures, because we shouldn't be demanding everybody talk about the hostages in Gaza and just completely ignoring the ones in Israel. And frankly, they're not even hostages, because that implies there's some way to get them out. You give us this, we give you. These people have just been disappeared into these places.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And just to add to what you said, we met some people who were basically kidnapped out of their homes in the dark of night. I mean, it's like the Gestapo. Here come the military, they kick in your door in the middle of the night, they grab your kids or they grab your husband, and away they go, and you don't know. I mean, you're terrorized, and they go into these gulags that Jasper was just talking about. It's horrifying, really. Okay, a couple more topics, and then we'll go to Q&A. And one is the thing about the two-state solution, which I don't know. I mean, aside from the international community that keeps harping on two-state solution, I don't really know any Palestinians that think that's even a feasibility. Basically, Israel's taken away that, and they say it out loud too. I mean, all the settlements are creating Bantustan's, and they've taken away the possibility of a two-state solution, and they'll resist it. So most Palestinians that I have interacted with say well, it's a one-state solution. It's got to be a one democratic, equal rights for all, which Israel would never agree to, because it violates the idea of a ethno-nation, a Jewish supremacy nation. If you have equal rights for all, then there's going to be a demographic against you that's going to not be a Jewish supremacy nation anymore. Anyway, I'm sort of giving my rap on it. Can you talk a little bit about? Oh, and most recently, the E1 settlement block approval that got passed sort of puts the brakes on it too. Can you just talk a little bit about the one state, two state thing?
Yeah. So the two-state solution, to me, it's sort of just become a euphemism at this point. But I'm pretty sure that when people invoke the two-state solution, they're talking about a Palestinian state and a Jewish state of Israel side by side. And it's a nice thought. And the American politicians and Western politicians love to talk about it in order to, in my opinion, not have to answer the tough questions about what this Palestinian state that they're talking about actually is. And so what I mean by that is, even before E1, which I'll talk about in a second, as you said, Ken, the settlements have carved the West Bank up into basically a sea of Israeli controlled territory and then little enclaves of Palestinian controlled territory. So already, you're looking at a handful of, Bantustans, and then you have Gaza over here, and there's no way for them to get to each other. Um, the latest project, it's called the E1 settlement project. What it's doing is it's connecting the settlements in East Jerusalem, building a line between those settlements and then the settlements that are on the east side of the West Bank. And so what that does is it severs the West Bank in two. So Palestinians in the north can't get to the southern West Bank, and the Palestinians in the south can't get to the northern West Bank. Now, the West Bank is not huge. It's about the size of Delaware, I think, and it's not unusual for people to travel around it. They just will not be able to do that anymore. And it also cuts off East Jerusalem from the West Bank. E1, funny enough, has actually been, I think, every American president, and maybe even Trump included in his first term, basically said you can't build an E1. That's like the line we can't cross. And I think it's because, they had to maintain this fiction of a two-state solution to be able to just support Israel and everything else. But now, all the guardrails are off, like I said, so they're building an E1. And so now, again, when we talk about a Palestinian state or a two-state solution, there is, a potential like formal recognition by the UN, which I guess is, maybe accounts for something, but what is this actual state that people are talking about? It does not exist. And so it just kind of drives me crazy. I mean, the analogy I've been using lately is I think talking about a two-state solution is basically like being a climate denier. Um, because yes, I would also like to imagine that we can just go on, driving our cars and, using the fossil fuels and not have to worry about it. But, people are suffering because of it, and we're, toasting the earth. It's the same thing with the two-state solution. It's nice to be able to talk about it because then you don't have to deal with the fact that there's 750,000 armed settlers in the West Bank who, it would take an international, global military coalition to get them out, which is not going to happen. So, look, like I saw somebody just ask, what's the solution? I mean, I don't have one. Like, what's the solution to climate change? I don't know. A good start would be, some fossil fuel restrictions. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but, carbon caps, those sorts of things. What I say the solution to Palestine is, for starters, I mean, you have to end the genocide, obviously. You have to end the occupation of the West Bank. And I mean, I ultimately am for a one-state solution, in part because, again, there is no way to make two states out of this one, plot of land. Um, but I just don't honestly. Somebody asked me the other day, like, what do you think is going to happen after this? And it occurred to me I hadn't even thought about it in so long. I mean, the situation is so bad that you really have to just like make all these terrible things stop, and then maybe we can start to think about the solution. But I mean, Israel is a rogue state. They're a rogue state. They're not listening to anybody, and America is just, not wielding its influence, and so they're killing whoever they want. They bomb, a different country in the Middle East every day. Um, they might drag us all into nuclear war. It's just a complete nightmare. So anyway, I don't I don't engage too much with like the one state, two state question, except to say, let's just, not pretend that, we live in this fantasy land where there's a two-state solution. So that's what I think about that.
Yeah, me too. Okay, lastly on my part, the word smooth. Many people know it, some do not. It's a word that people use to describe the resilience and the persistence and the unbelievable perseverance of the Palestinians in the face of this occupation and in Gaza, the genocide. So I will say that my visit to Palestine on both occasions that I went there, despite all that we're talking about, was in some odd way uplifting. And the reason it was uplifting is because the Palestinians themselves are not defeated people. They don't act like a defeated people. They're going about their lives. They're loving their family members. They're generous. They laugh. They joke. They they endure all that they're enduring, but by the same token, not only are they determined to resist, but their resistance takes on a face that looks like it doesn't look like anger. I mean, they're angry. It doesn't look like that all the time. It looks like just trying to live a normal life. Um, so I just want to say something that it isn't entirely negative. I don't want to think of the Palestinians, even though they're being brutalized, as victims, because they don't think of themselves that way. I don't think. What do you say about that, Jasper?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think both things are true. Like they are victims, and they are being brutalized. But frankly, they're used to it, and they have no choice but to just sort of keep going. I'll talk about the West Bank in a second, but I just want to mention, like, I talked to a friend of mine was able to actually get into Gaza with one of these like health groups, and he spent like a month there. And I asked him like, what are people doing all day? Everything's been destroyed. There's no jobs anymore. Like besides just suffering and dying and trying to find, what are they doing? And he was like, what do you think they're doing? They're hanging out. Like they're doing the same thing, we do in America. They're getting together and talking and laughing and playing games and like so in a way, like life goes on because it has to go on. I think that like they just are not, laying down and accepting their fate anywhere. I mean, in the West Bank, first I'll just say a lot of people like to say, oh, try going to Palestine as a Jewish person, see what happens. Like, well, I went as a Jewish person. I wasn't walking around with a yellow star pinned to my shirt, but I was, telling people when it felt appropriate, and it was met with nothing but warmth. And basically the question is, well, are you with the people who want to kill us and dispossess us? No, you're not. Okay, great. Your family, come on in, break bread with us. And, that is the attitude that I have gotten everywhere I've traveled in the West Bank. In terms of the resiliency thing, and maybe I'll just tell this one quick story. So this town of Sebastia that I keep talking about, there's this, big Palestinian flag, like all the way at the top of the hill, which is a point of pride for the town, in part because the settlements can see it. Settlements can see the Palestinian flag and they hate it, and we know they hate it. And so it's very important to them to keep the flag up. The Israeli military, I don't know exactly what's happening today, but when I was there last year, every single day they come in and they take the flag down. And as they're doing it, they knock the pole down, they steal the flag, and on the way they beat the crap out of people, they tear gas people, they demolish things. They shot somebody when I was there in the leg. I had a gun pointed at me, and then they go and take the flag down and they leave. And every single night, without fail, a group of Palestinians go and put the flag back up. To the point that I actually said to the mayor, like, are you sure this is a good idea? Like maybe leave the flag down so they won't come in and destroy everything. And he said to me, and I knew he was going to say this, but he's like, then we've got no reason to live anymore. Like we're all we've got is our resilience, and like showing them that they can't defeat us. And we know that every single day at those settlements, they're looking and waiting to see if the flag's going to go back up. And if it doesn't go back up, then they win. And so I just thought that was, I mean, it's a little crazy, especially when they start like, hurting people. But yeah, they're just not going to let that flag come down. So, yeah, I mean, those people are just not going to leave. It's really that simple.
Amazing, amazing story. Thanks. Okay, we're going to go to Q&A now. And so let's give ourselves about 15 minutes for this, if you're okay with that, Jasper.
Sure.
And the way we do it, if you've been with us before, is if we had in the Zoom dashboard, there's a option to raise your hand, right, digitally. And so if you use that, what happens is you pop up to the top. I see your hand raised, and I'll call on you, and we'll get you on the mic, and you can ask the question. And the only thing I would ask, as I always do, is many people want to make comments, and I completely understand that. If you would keep it brief, don't give a long talk. Just make a comment and have a question. do have a question that Jasper can respond to, so he's our guest, we can get him to keep talking. So with that said, who wants to ask a question that, we can ask Jasper to go ahead with? So Peter Schultz, you're the one with the hand raised. So if you will, see here, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question. You're able to unmute yourself. Brian, can you help him unmute maybe?
Yeah, there should be a prompt that comes right up on your screen, Peter, asking you to unmute. But if Peter's struggling, I can reach out to him one-on-one in the chat, and we can move on to another question.
Okay. Yeah, so Peter's not still muted.
I see Zarina though, but I will reach out to you in the chat directly, Peter, to try and help you out.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, Zarina, if you will unmute yourself and then go ahead. There you are. Great. Go ahead and ask your question.
So my question is, I heard there's a lot of organ harvesting and a lot of organ transplants being used from Palestinians. Also, I was wondering what the medical system is and the daily life, the food and general well-being in the West Bank. It sounds like they're similar to Gaza in the stance or getting there.
I don't know about the organ harvesting thing. I've heard the same rumors. I wouldn't really put anything past the Israeli military, but I don't know about that. The medical system is great. They have fantastic hospitals and doctors. Unfortunately, you really can't get to them anymore. I mentioned the story about the guy who's losing his vision. But I actually got sick, not like seriously sick, but I got a little sick when I was in Sebastia, and I went to see a doctor, and he was about as good as any doctor I've ever seen before. Palestinians really take a lot of pride in education, which is, part of what makes the targeting and annihilation of universities and libraries and whatnot in Gaza so devastating. But yeah, it's a great medical system. The ambulances are regularly targeted and blocked from getting to Palestinians after they're shot or, beat up or run over. The food, well, Israel controls most of the water in the West Bank, which mostly comes from the Jordan River, and they sort of siphon it, out of Palestinian land and over to the settlement. So that obviously gets in the way of growing and whatnot. And there's a lot of just trade restrictions. But otherwise, the West Bank is like before all this, before Smotrich came in and made these changes on October 7th. It was a flourishing society within the confines of the apartheid system that had been built. And now it's really been ground to a halt, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zarina. I don't see other hands. How about a question from anyone here? And if you don't feel like you want to say it out loud on camera, you can type it into the chat. Oh, there's a couple.
Got a couple of hands. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Brian. So Nancy Nelson, if you would unmute, and there you are. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Well, Jasper, thank you. As I put in the chat, and thank you, Ken, for mentioning Jeff Halper. I was in Palestine in April with an ICAD group, and we saw so much of what you're talking about, Jasper. But I do want to mention one name that hasn't been mentioned, and that's Rabbi Eric Erishman, who people could Google, Arishman, and he has a group, Torah Zedek. I could write it in the chat, and they're working there. He's out almost every day in body armor. When we went out and met him, he was taking off his body armor, protecting the Bedouin farmers against the settlers who will come in the night and destroy their, like as you said, their houses, their flocks. And so he's really an amazing group. But I just like to emphasize the water. I didn't hear you emphasize that on top of every Palestinian house, there's this tiny little tank that they've paid very dear money for to have that water. You go over to a settlement not too far away, they've got swimming pools and beautiful shrubbery, and all the water is free. And the settlers will, as I think you alluded to, go and sabotage the little water systems that the Palestinians are trying to set up. And so it's, I don't know. I was like you, Ken. I came home with, I felt in power. I felt really happier while I was there than when I got home, because the Palestinians were so thankful and so happy everywhere we went. They were, thank you. You're reminding us that we're not forgotten. And we made what donations we could, like the Jordan Valley housing and agricultural system. I mean, so, but then to get home in the system you're describing, Jasper, and the Palestinian Authority that I also didn't hear you mention, that in the West Bank, it taxes the Palestinians. It doesn't help them. They're really in cahoots with the, so I think all we can do is keep working, unless you come up with other ideas, Jasper. I think that's all we can do. And I saw someone put in the chat the emergency webinar tomorrow with Lives for Palestine, that they're going to be talking about getting an UN resolution that maybe there could be some UN intervention to stop the UN, stop the Israeli army with its support from the US. And last thing, just I see the West Bank situation happening in Washington, D.C. Checkpoints, tanks, soldiers. So I'm just sort of really horrified at I'm more horrified than I would be if I hadn't been in Palestine. So anyway, thanks to all who are trying to do something about it, I guess is all we can say, Jasper. Thank you.
There might be a question in there somewhere, but yeah, something for you to respond to, Jasper?
No, I mean, I agree with everything Nancy said. And I know Rabbi Eric Asherman. Yeah, I mean, if you look him up, you'll just see like video after video of him getting beat up by settlers. Yeah, no, I agree with everything Nancy said.
Yeah, me too. And since you mentioned a name, I'll mention another name, is Mazen Kumseya. He has a newsletter. He sends out virtually every day. He lives in Bethlehem. He's a professor. Has a museum of biodiversity, which is amazing. We stayed with him when we went there. So
Did you see that?
that's another name.
Did you see the hyenas? Does he still have 2 hyenas?
He has 2 hyenas. He certainly does. Yeah, and he releases them. I mean, they're injured animals, and they nurse them back to health, and then they let them go. Yeah. So that's a name you can look up. Mazin, Mazen Kumseya, starts with a Q. Kumseya. Okay, let's have maybe a couple more questions before we call it an evening. I see somebody with a phone number, 1773-409-6157. So go ahead.
Hi, Jake is my name, calling from Chicago. Thank you for your talk. If you reject, my question is, if you reject the 2-state solution, then what's the answer? What do you propose?
I don't have an answer. I just think that well, my ultimate answer is a 1-state solution, but I don't have what I know is that too many politicians use the talking point of a 2-state solution to avoid having to address the actual difficult questions about the way the government, the Israeli government and the settlement movement have just precluded the possibility of a Palestinian state and a 2-state solution. So me saying, I don't hate the 2-state solution. I don't have anything against it. I just think that we cannot let politicians get away with just saying, I support the 2-state solution because again, that to me is a way of just saying, I'm just going to throw out this talking point without having to actually address the situation. So to me, it's about the sort of political value of it and not letting politicians get away with it anymore, frankly. Because, as everybody knows, like Democrats, Republicans, I mean, nobody's fought for Palestinians. That's one thing they can all agree on for the most part, with a few small exceptions. And I think that the Democrats sound better on it sometimes because they talk about even Kamala in her DNC speech, I think, talked about Palestinian right to self-determination, but that doesn't mean anything if you're not describing what that actually means, what the state looks like. And so what I'm saying is I want to get rid of that talking point and force them to actually address the issues.
Yeah, good. Let's see. Well, I don't see more questions, so maybe we will call it an evening. Jasper, do you have something else that, like, something people should understand that you haven't maybe had a chance to say yet?
Oh, I don't know. We covered a lot. I mean, maybe just yeah, Ken, you really covered all of it in your questions. But I guess, like, you might hear news in the coming days about some sort of announcement from Israel that they've like declared sovereignty over part of the West Bank. And I guess just keep in mind it's basically a formality. They've already annexed the West Bank in all but name. And Peter's asking, what can we do? Oh, I wish I knew. I wish I had a good answer to that question. I mean, I think like we have to keep giving our politicians hell. And I think that, like, if a Democrat is taking $1 from AIPAC, then like they're out as far as I'm concerned. I'm actually like working on my own list of litmus tests for politicians on Palestine, but like I think that the only way things are going to get better for Palestinians is if the US ultimately cuts off weapons and support for Israel. And the way to do that is through pressuring politicians. And the only thing they feel is money and votes. And so that's what I think. I do see James looks like has a question too, Ken.
Okay, let's have James then. If you can, James and Minister, go ahead.
You're on mute though, James.
Can you unmute yourself, James?
Yeah, little blue box should pop up for you, James, prompting you to unmute yourself. I will try and send. Yeah, there you go. There you
Yeah.
go.
These people, whatever the solution is, are going to have to live together in the future, however long that's going to be, on the same land. And I don't think it's practically possible for them to work enough exchanges so the right of return gets totally honored. So what they might have to do to come up with a solution, money as opposed to land, reparations. Somebody should speculate on how much the Israelis and their industries and their benefactors will have to part with in order to become anywhere dangerously close to making reparations for what they have done. Whether it's $100,000 for every dead person they find under the rubble, but at least talking about it will put the burden back where it's supposed to be. These are the people who decided to go hurt someone or steal their land. I think the world would be better off talking about the realism of making reparations to the Palestinians and treat that as the highest order of the day, not always falling into despair. I mean, Netanyahu says some pretty weird things. It's time for somebody to say something striking for the Palestinians. Thank you.
I agree, but I'll just say that Israel is actually is offering money to Palestinians in the West Bank to leave, and they won't take it, understandably. So like ultimately they're fighting over the land itself. And I would, reparations are certainly in order. I just don't, that to me, you're on mute, James, if you're
Sorry, I can bring James back in if you'd like.
sure. Looks like he's got he wants
Yeah.
to fire back.
Sorry about that, James.
I'm not suggesting in any sense that they leave, because certainly there will probably be people who do want to go back to their homes in the other parts of Palestine.
Mhm.
But the whole notion above it is not them, they offer money for them to get out of the country. They offer them money because they are such evil people and they have done so much damage to those people. How are the present generation of Palestinians going to ever adapt to being productive citizens after having put up with 2 years of constant bombing?
Yeah, I think about that all the time.
Is there anybody who's going to make up for that? I'll go now.
Thank you, James. Well, it's been a good evening. Thank you, Jasper. Sharing a lot with us. Appreciate it so much. So we put at the beginning of this session, and just now, Brian did again put Jasper's Substack link in the chat. It's Infinite Jazz, one word, J-A-Z, Infinite J-A-Z, one word, Substack. And thank you for being here, everyone. Thank you for your concern about Palestine. As probably most of the world shares our concern. I think that's true. And someday they will be free. We hope, we pray. So to put an end to this, let me just remind you that we do these every month. We have one scheduled for October 8th. Coming up next month. And it's one of those sessions where we have people who have been grassroots organizers fighting against the war machine. And in this case, it's from Louisville, Kentucky. A number of people who went up against Raytheon, got arrested, went to trial, all of that. And so they're going to tell their story about their resistance against Raytheon, who, of course, we know the war profiteers are making a big profit off of what's coming down in Palestine and Gaza, Raytheon and Lockheed and all of them. So thanks again, and peace be with all of you, and thanks, Jasper, for being with us. We'll send
Thank
the
you for having
recording
me,
out
Ken.
soon.
Yeah.
Okay.